Daniel Harper had learned one rule early in life: never look back. In London, looking back slowed you down. It made you hesitate, and hesitation was dangerous at the level he played. That was why Daniel signed documents without reading every line. He trusted his team, he trusted the process. And above all, he trusted the life he had built clean, controlled, and far removed from the past. So when his solicitor placed another slim folder on the glass table inside the Canary Wharf office, Daniel signed without lifting his head. One smooth stroke of the pen. Done. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and glanced at his watch. "I have a board call in 10 minutes, he said calmly. "Send me a summary later." The solicitor didn't move. "Mr. Harper," he said gently, "there's a detail you may want to review." Daniel paused, and he hated pauses. He turned slowly, irritation flickering across his face. "If it's not urgent—" "It is," the solicitor said, carefully choosing his words. Daniel exhaled and sat back down. He flipped open the folder, expecting numbers, figures, or fine print. Instead, he saw a name that pulled the air from his chest. Under the heading Educational History and References, printed neatly on the page, was Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. Daniel stared. For a second he thought it was a mistake. For another second he hoped it was. "That can't be right," he said quietly. The solicitor nodded slowly. "That was my first thought too." Daniel's fingers tightened around the page. "This reference shouldn't be here." "She submitted it herself," the solicitor replied. Daniel looked up sharply. "Oh, she retired years ago." "Yes," the solicitor said, "but she asked for this meeting personally." Daniel looked back down. At the bottom of the page, in neat blue handwriting, was a short note. Simple, calm, familiar. "You always rushed through reading, Daniel. I hope you'll take your time with this." His heartbeat thudded loudly in his ears. Only one person ever wrote to him like that. Only one person corrected him without raising her voice. Only one person had ever called him Daniel when the rest of the world called him gifted, special, or brilliant. His teacher. The woman he had carefully placed in the past. And she was in the building. Before the headlines, before the technology empire, before London learned his name. Daniel Harper was just a quiet boy growing up in East London. I'm in a small flat that always smelled of cleaning soap and reheated tea. His mother worked long hours and spoke often about sacrifice. "Education is your way out," she used to say. "Don't waste it." Daniel took her words seriously. He studied hard, but confidence did not come easily. He wrote beautifully but rarely spoke. He feared saying the wrong thing, sounding foolish, or being laughed at. That was when Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore noticed him. She taught English literature at his public secondary school. She was not loud or dramatic. She did not demand attention. She earned it. She noticed how Daniel rewrote his essays again and again. How he hesitated before raising his hand. How he stayed behind after class, pretending to tidy his desk. One afternoon she asked him to stay back. "Why do you doubt yourself so much?" she asked gently. Daniel shrugged. "I don't want to get it wrong." She smiled softly. "That's how learning works." From then on, she became his anchor. She helped him find his voice. She encouraged him to read aloud. She praised his ideas, not just his grades. And once, after returning an essay, she said something he never forgot. "Success is not just about how far you go, Daniel. It's about how you get there." At the time, he nodded and smiled. He did not understand. Not yet. Years passed quickly. Daniel grew. Opportunities came. A recommendation. A scholarship. A future that suddenly looked much bigger than East London. Mrs. Whitmore supported him, but somewhere along the way, things became complicated. Life moved fast. Conversations became shorter, then fewer, and eventually silent. Daniel went on to build something extraordinary. A company that changed industries, a reputation built on innovation and precision. And with each step forward, the past faded further away. Or so he believed. Back in the Canary Wharf office, Daniel closed the folder slowly. "She wants to see me," he said. "Yes," the solicitor replied. "She's waiting downstairs." Daniel leaned back in his chair. He told himself this was nothing, just a coincidence, just an old chapter resurfacing briefly. But deep inside, something stirred, something uneasy. A soft knock sounded at the door. The solicitor stood. "She's here." Daniel did not respond. The door opened. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore stepped inside. She was older now. Her hair was touched with grey. Her clothes were simple and neat. But her posture was straight, confident, the same posture she had in the classroom. She looked at Daniel, not with anger, not with warmth, but with calm understanding. "You still move too fast," she said gently. Daniel swallowed. "Why are you here?" he asked. She walked forward and placed a thin, worn folder on the table between them, the kind used in schools, the kind that held records, essays, and memories. "Because some lessons don't end when school does," she replied. Daniel stared at the folder, because he knew opening it would mean facing a part of himself he had carefully avoided, and not opening it would not make it disappear. Mrs. Whitmore met his eyes. "You taught yourself how to forget," she said softly. "Now it's time to remember." Daniel's hand hovered over the folder, his heart pounded. And because in that moment he understood something he had avoided for years. Some names are not meant to be erased, and this one had finally come back. Daniel Harper did not open the folder immediately. He stared at it the way a man stares at a locked door he is afraid to enter. The room was quiet, too quiet. Outside the glass walls of the office, London moved on as usual. Phones rang, footsteps passed, elevators hummed. But inside that room, time felt frozen. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore sat across from him, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She did not rush him. She never had. That was one thing Daniel remembered clearly. "You don't have to open it yet," she said softly. "I didn't come to force you." Daniel let out a slow breath. "Then why are you here?" She looked at him carefully, and as if choosing her words the way she used to choose exam questions. "Because some stories become heavier when they're ignored," she replied, "and I believe you're strong enough now to face this one." Daniel gave a small, humorless smile. "You always believed that." She returned the smile, faint but steady. "And you always tried to run ahead of yourself." Her words stirred something uncomfortable inside him. He leaned back in his chair. "I built my life on moving forward. Digging up the past doesn't change anything." Mrs. Whitmore nodded. "That's what you told yourself. But that doesn't mean it's true." Daniel looked away, his eyes drifting toward the window. The Thames reflected the grey sky, calm on the surface, restless underneath. Finally, he reached for the folder, not to open it, just to touch it. Inside the folder were copies of old school records, letters of recommendation, and essays written in neat teenage handwriting. His handwriting. Daniel flipped through slowly. Each page pulled him further back in time. There was his first essay Mrs. Whitmore had praised. There was the scholarship application he had nearly given up on. There was even a photocopy of a handwritten note she had once given him after class. "Don't shrink yourself to fit fear. You're allowed to take space." Daniel swallowed hard. "I didn't know you kept these," he said quietly. "I didn't know you forgot them," she replied. He paused. That was not entirely true. He hadn't forgotten. He had simply buried them under success, ambition, and the noise of adulthood. "Why now?" he asked. "Why come back after all these years?" "Mrs." Whitmore leaned forward slightly. "Because I saw your name in the papers again. Another award, another interview." She hesitated. "And I realized the story people tell about you is missing a chapter." Daniel stiffened. "The media doesn't need to know everything." "I didn't say the media," she replied gently. "I said you." As Daniel turned another page, a memory surfaced clear and sharp. It was the year everything changed. The year he had been shortlisted for a private scholarship that could take him far beyond East London. The competition was fierce. The pressure was intense. Daniel remembered staying up late, rewriting essays, second-guessing every sentence, and he remembered the conversation, the one he had avoided thinking about. "Daniel," Mrs. Whitmore had said that afternoon, "this opportunity is important. But you must be honest in your application." He had nodded quickly. "Of course." She had studied him closely. "Promise me something. No shortcuts, no half-truths." He had promised. At least, he thought he had. Back in the present, Daniel closed the folder. "I didn't come here to relive my childhood," he said, a little sharper than before. Mrs. Whitmore did not flinch. "I know." "Then what do you want?" he asked. She took a breath. "I want you to remember the boy you were before success made everything complicated." Daniel laughed once. "That boy doesn't exist anymore." Her eyes softened. "He does. He's just been very quiet." There was a knock at the door. Daniel's assistant poked his head in. "Sir, the board call starts in 5 minutes." Daniel nodded. "Give me a moment." The door closed again. Silence returned. Mrs. Whitmore stood slowly. "I won't keep you." Daniel looked up, surprised. "You're leaving?" "For now," she said. "This isn't a conversation you rush." She picked up her handbag and paused. "There's something else," she added. Daniel tensed. "What?" She reached into her bag and placed a single envelope beside the folder. Not thick, not dramatic, just plain. "This is a letter," she said. "I wrote it years ago but never sent it." Daniel stared at it. "Why give it to me now?" "Because you're finally in a place where you can choose what kind of man you want to be," she replied. "Not a student, not a billionaire, just a man." She stepped back, then added quietly, "Read it when you're ready." Mrs. Whitmore walked toward the door. Just before leaving, she turned. "You once asked me what success really meant," she said. "I told you it wasn't about winning. It was about integrity." Daniel's chest tightened. "I hope," she finished, "that lesson wasn't lost." The door closed behind her. Daniel was alone again. The board call came and went. Daniel barely spoke. His mind was elsewhere. After the meeting, he dismissed his team and remained seated in the quiet office. Slowly, he picked up the envelope. His name was written on it in careful handwriting. Daniel Harper. No title, no achievement, just his name. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. He began to read. Halfway through, his breathing changed. By the end, his hands were shaking. The letter did not accuse him. It did not blame him. It simply told the truth as she remembered it, and the choice he had made when he was young, afraid, and desperate to succeed, and a choice that had followed him into adulthood. Daniel leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of something he could not fix with money, lawyers, or time. Regret. His phone buzzed with a new message. A calendar notification appeared. Independent review meeting. Educational ethics panel date. 2 weeks from now. Daniel frowned. He had no memory of approving that. Then he realized. Mrs. Whitmore had not come for a conversation alone. She had come to open a door, and once opened, it would not close easily. Daniel looked at the letter again, at his younger self's handwriting, at the lesson he had walked away from, and he understood something that made his chest ache. This was no longer about forgetting, it was about facing what he had become. Daniel Harper did not sleep well that night. Every time he closed his eyes, the words from the letter returned, quiet, measured, impossible to ignore. They were not angry words, they were worse. They were honest. By morning, London looked the same as always. Grey sky, steady traffic, people rushing forward without looking back. Daniel showered, dressed, and stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. He looked the same sharp suit, calm expression, but something underneath had shifted. He arrived at his office early, before his team, before the calls, before the noise. He wanted silence. He opened the folder again. This time he read everything. Slowly, line by line. The records showed dates, assessments, references, nothing dramatic on the surface, but Daniel now noticed what he had ignored before. Small notes, careful wording, gaps that had once felt convenient. He stopped at a copy of his scholarship recommendation. Mrs. Whitmore's handwriting appeared in the margin. Daniel has talent, but he struggles with pressure. He must be supported, not rushed. Daniel remembered that day. The office at school smelled of old books and chalk dust. Mrs. Whitmore had sat across from him, her hands folded just as they had been in the Canary Wharf office. "This scholarship could change everything," he had said, his voice tight. "If I miss this chance." "I know," she replied, "but we do this properly." He remembered nodding. He also remembered walking out of that office, feeling afraid. Afraid that honesty might not be enough. The knock on Daniel's office door pulled him back to the present. His assistant stepped in. "Sir, there's been an email." Daniel looked up. From who?" "An independent review panel," the assistant replied. "They're requesting documents related to your early academic history." Daniel felt a dull ache form in his chest. "When?" he asked. "They want everything by the end of the week." Daniel nodded. "Forward it to legal." The assistant hesitated. "They also asked if you'd be willing to attend an informal discussion." Daniel didn't answer immediately. An informal discussion. That was how these things always started. "Tell them I'll consider it," he said. When the door closed, Daniel leaned back in his chair. He had spent years believing distance erased responsibility. Now distance was collapsing. Later that day, Daniel found himself walking instead of taking his car. He crossed the Thames slowly, hands in his pockets, his thoughts loud. Mrs. Whitmore's words echoed again. Some lessons don't end when school does. He stopped halfway across the bridge and looked at the water below. For years, he had told himself a story, that he had simply worked harder than everyone else, that success came from discipline, not decisions. But the letter suggested something else. It reminded him of the night he rewrote part of his scholarship essay after a conversation with a classmate, of how he had convinced himself it was harmless, of how he never mentioned it again. No one had stopped him, no one had accused him. But someone had noticed. Mrs. Whitmore had noticed, and she had carried that knowledge quietly for years. 2 days later, Daniel agreed to meet her again. This time, not in an office. They sat in a small cafe near a public library in East London, the kind of place that smelled of coffee and old paper. Mrs. Whitmore arrived early, a book open in front of her. "You always liked arriving on time," she said when she saw him. Daniel managed a small smile. "I learned that from you." They ordered tea. For a while neither spoke. Then Daniel broke the silence. "I read the letter," he said. She nodded. "I thought you would." "I didn't realize how much I avoided thinking about that time," he admitted. "I told myself it didn't matter." She closed her book gently. "It mattered because it shaped you." Daniel looked down at his cup. "Why didn't you stop me back then?" Mrs. Whitmore did not answer right away. "Because you didn't ask for help," she said finally, "and because sometimes people have to live with their choices to understand them." Daniel exhaled slowly. "They're reviewing my past now," he said. "Everything." "I know," she replied calmly. Daniel looked up sharply. "You knew?" "Yes," she said. "I agreed to participate." The words hit him harder than he expected. "You could have stayed silent," he said. She met his gaze. "So could you." Daniel had no reply. That evening, Daniel returned home and opened an old storage box he hadn't touched in years. Inside were notebooks, certificates, and school papers. At the bottom, he found an essay marked in red ink. Mrs. Whitmore's handwriting filled the margins. "Good ideas. Be careful not to hide behind perfection." Daniel sat on the floor, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. He finally understood what she had tried to teach him. Not about grammar, not about essays, but about honesty. The following morning, Daniel received another email. "Review meeting confirmed." This time, the tone was firmer. They wanted him present. They wanted clarity. Daniel stared at the screen for a long time. He could refuse. He could delay. But he knew the truth now. Delay would only deepen the wait. He closed his laptop and stood. For the first time in years, Daniel felt unsure of the next step. Not because of money, not because of reputation, but because he was finally facing the version of himself he had tried to forget. And as he reached for his coat, one thought settled heavily in his mind. This review wasn't about his past success. It was about whether he was willing to face the truth out loud. The review meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Daniel Harper noticed that detail because Thursdays used to be his quiet days. No media appearances, no product launches, no interviews. He had designed his week that way on purpose. Control mattered, but as Thursday approached, Daniel realized control was slipping through his fingers in ways he could not predict or manage. The meeting was not held in a grand building or a courtroom. It was held in a modest conference room inside a public education trust near Bloomsbury. The walls were plain, the chairs were ordinary, There were no cameras, no reporters. That somehow made it worse. Daniel arrived early, again. He stood by the window, watching students walk past with backpacks and books, laughing loudly, unaware of how much weight a single decision could carry. When the door opened, 3 people walked in. 2 men and 1 woman. They introduced themselves politely members of the Independent Educational Review Panel. Their tone was calm, professional, and neutral. They were not there to accuse, they were there to listen. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore entered last. Daniel did not turn immediately. He already knew she was there. He felt it. When he finally looked, she gave him a small nod. Not encouragement, not judgment, acknowledgement. Everyone took their seats. The woman from the panel spoke first. "Mr. Harper, thank you for agreeing to this discussion." Daniel nodded. "I felt it was important." "Good," she replied. "This is not a trial, it's a review. We want clarity, context, and reflection." Daniel clasped his hands together under the table. Reflection. That word echoed. They began with the basics, Daniel's academic history, his achievements, and his early promise. As they spoke, he realized something strange. For the first time in his life, his success sounded quiet. Not impressive, not loud, just factual. Then the questions shifted. "Mr. Harper," one of the panel members asked, "can you describe the pressure you felt during your final year of secondary school?" Daniel hesitated. He could answer with something safe, something vague, but he didn't. "I felt afraid," he said. The room went still. "Afraid of what?" the man asked. "Of staying where I was," Daniel replied, "of missing the one chance I thought I had." Mrs. Whitmore looked down at her hands. The panel member nodded. "And how did that fear influence your decisions?" Daniel swallowed. He remembered the nights he had stared at his essay drafts. The panic, the belief that everyone else was better. Smarter, more confident. "It made me rush," he said. "It made me justify things I shouldn't have." No one interrupted him. No one reacted strongly. That silence was heavy. Then the woman on the panel turned to Mrs. Whitmore. "Mrs. Whitmore, you taught Mr. Harper during that period. How did you experience it?" Mrs. Whitmore lifted her head. "Daniel was talented," she said calmly, "but he was also overwhelmed. I tried to slow him down. I tried to remind him that integrity mattered." She paused. "I don't believe he intended harm. I believe he was afraid." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. That was worse than anger. The discussion continued for over an hour. They talked about responsibility, about mentorship, about the quiet power teachers hold over young minds. At no point did anyone raise their voice. At no point did anyone accuse, but Daniel felt exposed in a way he never had before. Finally, the panel concluded the session. "We appreciate your honesty," the woman said. "We'll review everything discussed and follow up." Daniel nodded. As the panel members stood to leave, one of them added, "This process is not about punishment. It's about understanding." Understanding. Daniel wondered how many years it had taken him to reach this point. Outside the building, London moved on. Cars passed, buses stopped and started. Life continued. Mrs. Whitmore walked beside him in silence for a moment. Then she spoke. "That wasn't easy," she said. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "No." They stopped near a small park. Children were playing on a climbing frame, shouting joyfully. Daniel watched them. "I used to think being strong meant never looking back," he said quietly. Mrs. Whitmore nodded. "Many people think that." "I was wrong," he added. She looked at him, then not as a teacher, not as a witness, but as someone who had seen him grow. "Growth is not about erasing mistakes," she said. "It's about learning from them." Daniel hesitated. "Do you think I can still make this right?" She considered the question carefully. "You can't rewrite the past," she replied, "but you can decide what the truth does next." The following days were some of the longest Daniel had experienced in years. News of the review did not explode across headlines, but whispers began to circulate in professional circles. Quiet emails, careful phone calls. "Is everything okay?" "Just checking in." "Heard there was a review." Daniel answered calmly. How professionally. But inside, something was shifting. For the first time, he began questioning decisions he had once celebrated, not because they were illegal, not because they were wrong on paper, but because of how they had shaped him. One evening, Daniel sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights glowing beneath him. He opened his laptop and searched for Mrs. Whitmore's old school. The website had changed, new staff, new students. But the mission statement remained. We believe education is about character, not just achievement. Daniel closed the laptop slowly. 2 weeks later, an email arrived. Review outcome, request for voluntary statement. Daniel read it twice. They were asking him to make a statement. Not required, voluntary, public or private, his choice. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, and he thought about his younger self, the boy who had been afraid, the teacher who had tried to slow him down, the man he had become. He realized something then. For years he had feared losing his reputation, but what scared him now was losing his integrity. Daniel asked to meet Mrs. Whitmore one last time. They met in the same cafe. She listened as he explained the email. They're giving me a choice, he said. I can say nothing. Let it pass quietly. And what do you want to do? She asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. I want to speak, he said finally, not because they asked, but because I owe it to myself. Mrs. Whitmore smiled faintly. That sounds like the student I used to know. Daniel nodded. I didn't listen back then. You're listening now, she replied. The statement was scheduled for release the following Monday. Daniel spent the weekend writing and rewriting it. He chose his words carefully. He did not dramatize, he did not excuse. He spoke plainly. About fear, about pressure, about learning the difference between success and integrity. He did not mention names, he did not accuse anyone. He simply told the truth as he understood it now. On Monday morning, he pressed send. The message went out, emails followed, some supportive, some cautious, some silent. Daniel felt lighter, not relieved, but honest. That evening, he received a short message. From Mrs. Whitmore, you finally read the whole lesson. Daniel smiled for the first time in weeks, but as he set his phone down, another thought crossed his mind. This chapter was not finished, and because the world was about to respond, and not everyone would be kind. Facing the truth was one thing, living with its consequences was another. The morning Daniel Harper's statement became public, London did not stop moving. Trains still ran late, coffee shops still opened at dawn, people still hurried past one another with heads down. But for Daniel, everything felt different. He sat alone in his study, the curtains open, watching the city wake up beneath a pale sky. His phone lay face down on the desk. He had turned off notifications the night before, knowing the moment would come whether he watched or not. He had spoken, he had chosen honesty. Now the world would decide what to do with it. The statement was simple, careful, clear. Daniel did not name schools or individuals. He did not accuse anyone. And he spoke only about himself, about fear, about pressure, about a young student who believed that success meant never slowing down. He wrote about learning, years later, that integrity mattered more than achievement. That guidance from teachers was not something to use and discard, but something to respect. And he ended with one sentence that mattered more to him than all the rest. I cannot change who I was, but I am responsible for who I choose to be now. The response came in waves. At first, silence, then emails. Some were short and supportive. Others were cautious, asking what this meant for future projects. A few were uncomfortable. Daniel read them all. He did not respond to most. For the first time in years, he was not trying to manage the story. He was letting it exist. Later that morning, Daniel received a call from his board. Not angry, not alarmed, measured. We've read the statement, the chair said. There will be questions. I understand, Daniel replied. There may be consequences, the chair continued. I understand that too, Daniel said quietly. There was a pause. Integrity matters, the chair finally said. We'll talk again soon. When the call ended, Daniel leaned back in his chair. He felt tired, but lighter. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore watched the news from her small flat, a cup of tea cooling beside her. She did not smile when she read the statement. She did not cry. She simply closed her eyes and breathed out slowly. For years she had carried a quiet weight. Not anger, not bitterness, just disappointment mixed with hope. She had never wanted revenge. She had wanted growth. And now, finally, she saw it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Thank you for teaching me to stop running." She stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "Learning takes time, even after school ends." The independent review panel released their outcome a few days later. The language was calm, balanced. They acknowledged that Daniel's early decisions were shaped by fear and pressure. They emphasized the importance of mentorship, transparency, and reflection. There were no dramatic announcements, no punishments, but there were recommendations. Daniel was asked voluntarily to support educational programs focused on ethics, mentorship, and student well-being. He agreed immediately, not because it would look good, but because it felt right. A month later, Daniel stood in a school hall again, not as a student, or not as a billionaire on a stage, but as a guest. The hall was modest. The chairs were plastic. The walls were covered with student artwork and handwritten poems. Daniel stood at the back at first, watching students settle into their seats. They laughed, they whispered, they waited. Mrs. Whitmore sat near the front, hands folded, watching him quietly. When Daniel was invited to speak, he walked forward slowly. No script, no slides, just him. He looked out at the students and saw something familiar in their faces: uncertainty, hope, pressure. "I'm not here to talk about success," he began. "You hear enough about that already." A few students smiled. "I'm here to talk about honesty," he continued, "about asking for help, about slowing down when fear tells you to rush." The room was silent. Daniel spoke plainly. About mistakes, about choices, about the teacher who taught him that words and actions last longer than achievements. He did not say her name. He did not need to. When he finished, there was no applause at first, then a single clap, then more. Mrs. Whitmore watched, her eyes shining, as students stood not because they were told to, but because something had reached them. After the event, Daniel and Mrs. Whitmore walked together through the quiet corridor. "You did well," she said. "I finally listened," he replied. She smiled. "That's all any teacher hopes for." Daniel stopped near the exit. "I owe you more than I can say," he added. She shook her head gently. "You don't owe me. You owe yourself, and the people you'll guide next." He nodded. "I won't forget that." She paused, then said softly, "You know, and I never wanted you to fail." "I know," Daniel replied. "I wanted you to grow." Daniel smiled. "I did. Just later than planned." Months passed. Life settled into a new rhythm. Daniel remained successful, but his definition of success changed. He spent more time mentoring young founders, asking questions he had once avoided. "Why do you want this? Who are you becoming? What will this cost you?" Some listened, some didn't. He learned that teaching did not always look like standing at a board. Sometimes it looked like asking the right question and letting silence do the work. One evening, Daniel visited his old neighborhood in East London. The streets looked smaller than he remembered. The school building still stood, though parts of it had been renovated. He walked past the gate and paused. A group of students were leaving for the day, laughing, backpacks swinging. One of them tripped and dropped his books. Another student helped him pick them up. Daniel smiled. Some lessons survived without him. Later that night, Daniel sat at his desk and opened a drawer. Inside was the old folder Mrs. Whitmore had brought him. He flipped through it one last time. Then he placed it carefully in a box, not hidden, not erased, but stored with respect. He closed the box and labeled it simply, "Lessons Learned." Mrs. Whitmore retired fully the following year. On her last day, she received letters from former students. Some were handwritten, some were typed. One stood out. Daniel's. It was short, clear, honest. "You taught me how to read. But more importantly, you taught me how to pause. And that lesson stayed even when I tried to forget it." She folded the letter gently and placed it in her drawer. Years later, when Daniel was asked in an interview what had changed him the most, he did not mention money, failure, or success. He said this instead: "A teacher who didn't give up on me even when I tried to outrun the lesson." The interviewer nodded, unsure how to follow that. But Daniel knew, and that was enough. Because some lessons do not end when school does. They wait, patiently, until you are ready to remember them.